Hello and welcome to episode 29 of Afrikanists Assemble. In this month's episode, we want to turn our attention towards the local communities on the ground, especially the influence of language research on these groups. We ask our contributors the following question. Have you ever witnessed research in African languages having an impact on local communities? If so, tell us about it. Or, conversely, are there specific ways you can imagine this research having a greater impact on local communities? Let's hear the responses of our contributors.
Ahụtụla m nchọcha eji asụsụ mba Afrịka mee nke nwere mmetụta n'ime obodo. Nchọcha a ka e mere 2006 ruo 2011 bụ nchọcha nke Nkechinyere jiri nweta nzere PhD ya. Ọ bụ ntụgharị site na Bekee gaa n'Igbo akwụkwọ akpọrọ Changing Behavior, A Challenge to Love, nke Reverend Sister Dr. Maxwell dere. Akwụkwọ a kọwara maka mpụtara nje na ọrịa mmịnwụ, ihe na-ebute ya, ka o si agbasa, ụzọ esi ebute na ụzọ esi ebute ya, nkwenye asị gbasara ya, mkpapụ, mmetụta anya akụ na ụba, egwuregwu dị iche iche. Ogo nje na ọrịa mmịnwụ nara oke elu n'afọ ndị 1990s na 2000, na-ekpochapụ ezinụlọ na ogbe, ọkacha n'Afrịka. N'agbanyeghị oge ịma ọkwa n'akwụkwọ nta akụkọ na nke TV na redio, ogo ndị na-ebute nje na ọrịa mmịnwụ na-abawanyekwa kwa ụbọchị. Ọtụtụ akwụkwọ, ngwa mgbasa ozi na asụ mgbasa ozi niile nọcha n'asụsụ Bekee n'agbanyeghị mmadụ ole na-agụ, ede ma na-aghọta asụsụ Bekee. N'oge m na-eme nchọcha m, esonyere m ụfọdụ otu ndị nkịtị nwe iji gbasa ozi maka usoro mbute na nlekọta ndị butere nje na ọrịa mmịnwụ site n'iji ntụgharị m gwa ha okwu ma kụziere ihe n'asụsụ Igbo. Asụsụ Igbo bụ otu n'ime oke ngwa agha iji lụso nje na ọrịa mmịnwụ ọgụ. Nke a wetara ezi mgbanwe, nghọta ihe bụ nje na ọrịa mmịnwụ, mgbanwe n'usoro obibi ndụ, oge ịdị ọcha gbagotere, oge mkpapụ belatara, nkwenye asị lara kpamkpam dịrịzie gawa. Iji asụsụ Igbo gbasoo ozi gbasara nje na ọrịa mmịnwụ ka weta mgbanwe agwa ma belata ogo mbute na ọnwụ si na nje na ọrịa mmịnwụ karịa asụsụ Bekee. Ụzọ pụrụ iche nchọcha anyị na nchọcha ndị ọzọ ga-esi nwekwuo mmetụta n'ogbo dị iche iche gụnyere: ha ga-atụgharị nchọcha niile e mere n'ogo mba ụwa gaa n'asụsụ ala anyị ka ọha na eze keta oke na nchọcha niile, ka ndị ọkachamara n'ọrụ dị iche iche na ndị ntụgharị na ndị ọkachamara n'asụsụ ala anyị bịakọọ ọnụ n'ịtụgharị nchọcha ndị e mere gaa n'asụsụ ala anyị ha. A ga-eji asụsụ ala anyị maọbụ asụsụ nke ogbe akụziri ndị mmadụ ihe na nchọcha emere n'agbanyeghị ego ha ma ọ bụ kwanụ ma ha bụ nwoke ma ha bụ nwaanyị. N'ezie, nchọcha anyị ga-aka amịta mkpụrụ n'ogbe anyị dị iche iche ma ọ bụrụ na a ga-atụgharị nchọpụta niile gaa n'asụsụ ala anyị maọbụ n'asụsụ nke ogbe, maka na agaghị enwe ikpa oke. Onye ọbụla ga-esonye, onweghị onye ga-aka ibe ya, ihe na-agaghị adị, enweghị ike ịkọwali uche onwe n'ihi ejikwataligo asụsụ mba ndị ọzọ agaghị adịzikwa. Onye ọbụla ga-enwe mmasị ịmụta ihe nke ga-eweta udo na mwulite ebe onweghị onye ga-akwa ibe ya emo. Ndewonu.
The issue or the question or poser for this month is a very interesting one. This whole question of research and its impact. And yes, it does say that have I ever witnessed research on African languages having an impact on local communities? I haven't myself, but I would like to bring to the attention of everybody a town in Osun State in Nigeria called Ibidun. And in Ibidun, they have what they call the Oriki Yoruba Festival. And I'm aware of a number of researchers that have done research on Oriki. Oriki is like praise song. They've done research on Oriki, and they have gone to the town to work with the residents of the place. And the Eburu Adekunle Yoruba, the Oba, who is the host of the event, is always in the forefront, championing scholars to come, do research in the place, and share the results and findings of their research with people of Ibidun. It's a community that if anybody ever goes to Nigeria should visit. The fourth edition of the Oriki Yoruba Festival is on the 16th of December 2023. So it means that they've had 3 successful ones, and this is the 4th. And you cannot participate in Oriki without research. And it's basically in Yoruba, and it's like the spoken word of the African American community. I can see how research will have a greater impact, because not only are the young people moving around doing their own research, they also benefit from the research of established scholars that go there to give a talk, or sometimes they visit the place and learn more from the people. And it's a community that there's so much that can be done in the place. I have an indirect relationship with the town, and I'm sure there are also many places in the Yoruba subnationality that will benefit and have an impact, a visible and measurable impact on their community.
If I'm asked whether I've witnessed research on African languages having an impact on local communities, or conversely, if there are specific ways I could imagine this research having a greater impact on local communities, I would rather say yes. I have a notion of how research in African languages can impact on local communities. Although I have not particularly witnessed a specific research impacting on local communities, there are ways I think this sort of research can have more impact on those groups. I would like to focus on the threat of what I call mega languages, by which I mean languages that are spoken over a very large swath of space, sometimes in 2 or more countries. Fulbe, Hausa, Swahili, Nyarwanda, and so on fall within this category. Smaller languages spoken within the domain of these mega languages are usually under threat of extinction or partial assimilation. Researching the influence of mega languages on minor indigenous languages has been undertaken many times, especially with regard to Hausa, the mega language of my region here in northern Nigeria. But there seems to not have been a serious concerted effort to ensure research findings impact speakers of minor languages in local communities. Just a few weeks ago, a colleague of mine hinted me that the Hausa's encroachment on local Jukun language here was already becoming notoriously evident. She told me that during greetings here, when the locals are asked how they were, they respond in Hausa, Lafia, instead of in Jukun, Rito. So for research in African language or languages to have significant impact on the speakers, orientation programs anchored in the local leaders' authority will go a long way. The people need to be conscientized of the threat certain linguistic behaviors have on them, their thought system, and their identity. Next, government must be able to commit resources and its authority to advance the endangered languages of the local community. Lastly, I suggest experts should be aware that researching about an endangered language is just the first step towards achieving community service. They should periodically go to the field to assess the strength of this language they had researched about. I think if we follow these tips, research in African languages will have greater impact on local communities.
Makadiko vateereri, ini ndinoitwa Shungu, ndinotaura chiShona, vamwe vanoti Shona, ndirwo rurimi rwaamai. Pamitauro yechivanhu muno muZimbabwe, chiShona ndiwo mutauro unotaurwa nevanhu vazhinji kudarika imwe yose mitauro yechivanhu. Unozoteverwa nemutauro wechiNdebele. Ini zvangu handigoni chiNdebele, ndakakura ndichitaura chiShona. Chirungu ndakatozochifunda ndave nemakore 6 ndichitanga zvidzidzo zvepuraimari. Ndinoda kutaura pamusoro pebasa rakaitwa nebazi repaYunivhesiti yeZimbabwe rinonzi African Languages Research Institute, auri muchidimbu. Pane dzimwe dzetsvakurudzo dzakaitwa nebazi iri, ndipo pakazobva duramazwi rechiShona rinotsanangudza chiShona muchiShona chete chete. Ini zvandakaita puraimari yangu mumakore kuma 1990, handaiziva kuti mwana wechikoro aitokwanisawo kuita duramazwi remutauro wechishona. Taingoziva chete kuti duramazwi raiwanika kumutauro wechirungu. Ndakatozoti ndava kuita zvidzidzo zvesekondari ndipo pandakatengerwa duramazwi rangu rekutanga naamai vangu. Asi duramazwi iri raitsanangudza chishona muchirungu. Hakusi kuti taitarisirwa kuva naro, ndini zvangu ndaitova neshungu dzekunyatszoziva mazwi echishona neuzhinji hwawo. Ndapedza zvidzidzo zvesekondari, ndakazosangana neduramazwi guru rechishona rinotsanangudza chishona muchishona chete chete. Rakabuditswa nebazi reAuri muna 1996. Ipapo ndakabva ndatoonawo sekunge pakanga pava nekushandiswa kwemaduramazwi navadzidzi vakati kuti muonero wangu Auri yakanga yabata basa guru rakakosha pakusimudzira mutauro wechishona. Asi zvese izvi zvandataura zvinobva pane muonero wangu nematorero andakazviita ini. Zvimwe haisiriyo nyaya yevamuwo vazhinji. Hongu tsvakurudzo dzakaitwa uye dzinoramba dzichiitwa neveAuri, asi mitauro yedu yechivanhu iyi ichiri yakasarira zvakanyanya mukufundiswa kana kushandiswa kwayo. Mumakore ano atava, vana vadiki kunyanya vemumataundi vava kutambura zvikuru nemitauro yedu yechivanhu. Kubata mutauro kukangodzamara kwakona mwana achiri mudiki, hapana pazvinosomboreruka mberi. Saka ini ndinoona sekunge dai tsvakurudzo idzi dzaizoburawo zvinhu zvakanangana nevechidiki kunyanya, sekuti duramazwi guru rotsigirwa nemaduramazwi akareruka kuvana vaduku. Ndingape muenzaniso wemaduramazwi evechidiki ane mufananidzo. Zvikadaro ndinoona sekunge zvingawedzere kubudirira kwetsvakurudzo dzakadai.
Research has a long history in changing the trajectory or development of things or people or even ideas. For example, if we look at the way we do things, let's say 100 years ago and now, and if we dare to project into the future, we're going to find a lot of differences. For example, back then, for one to travel, he treks either long distances or uses horses. But now there are trains that move at supersonic speed. And that same principle of change, which is occasioned by research, can be applied to language. For example, there are several languages that have various dialects, and it could constitute a problem when it comes to communication. And sometimes through research, there could be like harmonized dialect that could be used for the benefit or the generality of the same language with multiple dialects. In addition, through research, we find ways of adapting the language to fit existing technologies. For example, you could use music. Maybe through research, you could find a way of infusing, let's say, for example, a popular rap music and then using it in a particular language. It, in a way, can draw attention to the people. On the whole, I know that there is a lot that can be done, or there's a lot of impact that can be made if research is employed in language. And to be honest, African languages, particularly those in central Nigeria and northeastern Nigeria, a myriad of these languages are in dire need of thorough research. And this research, I believe, will bring about change and development to the people, the ethnic groups involved, and then the people.
I have not only witnessed studies on African languages which have impact on local communities, I have been directly a part of such projects. I will cite an example with a study on Jukun, which is the language of one of the major groups in Taraba State. Taraba State is in northeast Nigeria. I served as the lead researcher on the study of language and conflict, which adopted a social-linguistic orientation to investigate the impact of some social-linguistic phenomena such as language shift, language dominance, on recurring violent conflicts in the region. A preliminary survey of the linguistic landscape of the study area highlighted the dominance of Hausa over Jukun language in strategic domains in the community. The removal of Jukun language as a language of teaching and learning in schools, in Wukari, and as a subject of study in early grade classes. These were some of the subtle variables that contributed to tension in the community. As soon as the language group observed some of these variables, the research focus had to be modified to address language development issues first. The research group proposed language development program to the Traditional Council. They gladly accepted and provided support, even some funds to facilitate the project. Jukun Traditional Council mobilized some members of the community to work with scholars from higher education to mount adult literacy class in Jukun, organize language documentation program, and develop Jukun language curriculum for basic education. The group also worked with relevant agencies of the government to develop the Jukun curriculum for basic education. The curriculum also received government approval. This marked the reintroduction of Jukun language into primary education in the state. The community celebrated this event with a grand ceremony. The accommodation of Jukun language development project affected the pace of the study, which is still ongoing, but it has also contributed positively. Jukun community is known for guarding their language and culture with secrecy, but with the initial program, which was of benefit to the community, the Traditional Council offered support to the project on language and conflict, which is still ongoing. So there was mutual benefit here. The community benefited from the project, and the project in turn benefited from the community.
Yes, definitely. I have seen how the research on African languages can have an impact on a local community. Firstly, those communities will eventually see how the kakapusa or the erasure will be erected, because many times there are certain times or aspects that language has been seen as certain communities or local communities can only speak one specific language that has been set out for them, that are to be perceived according to censuses and structural geographical studies that has been made, but yet to be, even on an aspect that we are under the perception that Khoikhoi is not spoken but only an esoterical in one specific area in South Africa, which is not. How many times have we seen that many of these communities of people are spread out, even in communities where you see that language are still, and even doing on grassroots level this work, you can see the buru or the amazement of how Khoikhoi as a language has that power to empower and embark on new ways to make people feel that we are worthy. So, in hindsight, the muhesa anu, or the word seeing of these things that happen, it makes you happy, and also it makes you realize that a language is a tsekoropo or a daily thing that you can explore and let it be. And lastly, the munanai or the visualization that has been set out or planned out for this is to make sure that the language and the community, that the research has been done on the specific ways that you can imagine this research. As I said, this, the munanai or the visualization will be in the long run for future generations to see how and when and what the reasons is for this to be specifically broadened for future generations.
Personally, I haven't witnessed any research on an African language that has an impact on the community, but that notwithstanding, I wouldn't say there are not researches that will have impact on these different communities. On the other hand, I think that these researches could have impacts in ways, in my imagination. I think these researches might not go to waste, as they might have impact in the sense that I think one of the aim of African linguists, the aim is to ensure that the languages are actually not lost, or the languages do not die We do know of many African languages that have also died. And we think some of those languages even died without being talked about or without being written, or no one writing about those languages. And this is why I think that those researches might not completely go to waste, because the more researchers we have on different languages, the more people get to write about those languages, and the more I could say, the more archives we do have about these languages or on these languages. And even sometimes not just on archives. And when researchers get to research about these different languages and come back to talk about their languages, it's a way to let many other people get to know about existing languages like this. It's an opportunity to let people know more about their languages, and it does have an impact on those languages. If I also look at some languages, like youth languages, that maybe were not recognized, or maybe were being relegated or not well treated. Youth languages, pidgins, and other languages in Africa that are not being officially accepted. When I see how much researchers are beginning to talk about these languages, and I see how even the speakers themselves, I use pidgin for example, and maybe Franc-Anglais as a youth language and other youth languages. I see how the speakers, when they get to hear how researchers talk about their languages, how they find interest in their languages, the speakers themselves get to be proud of these languages, and they want to use these languages more, of which to me, this is also an impact. This is also an impact on research in African languages. And so I think this is something very great, or something very big for these languages. And in this sense, I will continue to encourage research on languages in general in African communities.
An African researcher weakness that has so much impact. It's the research from my church went on Bible translation in different languages, and apart from translating Bible, it also translated movies, especially movies about Jesus Christ coming, his birth, and then his death and resurrection. I remember vividly when we were kids, they announced the movie, and then it was in our mother's tongue, titled Jesu Lepo Movo, and then we all went and witnessed. It was in the village square, and I saw a lot of people getting connected to it. A lot of people understood the gospel better, and because Jesus in the Bible, in the movie, was speaking in Mogovo language, and then all the proverbs, the parables were all translated in the language. The people were connected, and after that, there was like an altar called, and people came in and gave their lives. So that is a research that I know it is from the church aspect that I've seen. And my own personal research, when I went about looking for proverbs in different languages on the plateau, like from 4 different dialects, I got my proverbs from clergymen who were involved in Bible translation in their own dialects. So I feel Bible translation too has impacted in Africa, contributed to the growth of African languages, where scriptures were now translated into different languages. I think this is one of the African research that I've witnessed that has a lot of impact on my community.
Vyema, nia yangu safari hii ni kueleza mpango wetu katika mradi fulani, na huu mradi ni wa kikundi chetu kinachoitwa Zahidi Mngumi Working Group. Katika kikundi chetu tupo watu 8 hivi, na kila mmoja anachangia kulingana na ujuzi wake katika kazi yetu ya kutafsiri mashairi ya Kiswahili ya karne ya 19 yaingie Kiingereza. Ni mashairi ya Kiamu hasa na mengi ya mshairi Zahidi Mngumi aliyefariki dunia mnamo mwaka 1830. Mashairi tulionayo yamo kwenye mswada uliopo maktabani mwa State Library of Berlin. Mpaka leo hatufahamu ni nani aliyeandika mswada huo ama nani aliyeomba uandikwe. Lakini tunachojua kabisa ni kwamba mashairi hayo ni mashairi ya Lamu, urithi wa Waamu yani. Kwa hiyo tunatarajia tukipata mkataba wa kutoa kitabu tuende Lamu na mashairi haya kwa Kiswahili na kwa Kiingereza, Waamu wapate kuyasoma na pia kuyasikiliza mashairi hayo. Kwani ni muhimu sana kwetu kwamba kazi yetu ya kutafsiri mashairi ya Zahidi Mngumi na washairi wenzake wa Lamu ijenge nafasi za kusherehekea utamaduni wa Lamu pamoja na Waamu wenyewe na kuyarudisha mashairi hayo tuseme nyumbani kwao pamoja na kuyaeneza kwa wasomaji wengine duniani. Tunatumaini kwamba utafiti wetu kwa namna hiyo utakuwa na faida kwa jamii na watu wa Lamu.
It is my pleasure to contribute to this episode and reacting to the question. I will say that it is quite challenging to come across research on African languages impacting local communities. So I will prefer to focus more on the second aspect of the question, that is the specific ways the recalibrating Afrikanistik project can significantly impact local communities. From my own perspective, I will observe that Africa is lagging behind in the area of technology. So as a suggestion, I believe that the project can support multidisciplinary research collaborations to develop language technologies for African languages, such as translation tools, speech recognition software, and other online tools that can be useful to local communities. In addition, some African countries are trying to promote the use of African languages in education. If we take my country, Nigeria, for example, the National Policy on Education mandates that the mother tongue or the language of the immediate environment of the child should be the medium of instruction in the early stages of primary education. But most of the time, the lack of indigenous resources affect the implementation of such laudable projects or policies. So recalibrating Afrikanistik can be involved in sponsoring research on the effectiveness of African languages as the medium of instruction in elementary schools in Africa. So this type of research, I believe, will help establish clear guidelines and best practices for implementing such policies. Furthermore, I also believe that recalibrating Afrikanistik can be involved in how to have standardized teaching materials and curricular design explicitly for the teaching of African languages.
Yes, I have witnessed research on African language having impact on locals. It was at the Obafemi Awolowo University Ile-Ife and University of Ibidun, both in Nigeria. At the Obafemi Awolowo University Ile-Ife and University of Ibidun, it was a visit by students to the Department of African Languages and Literature from the United States. In both universities, the host communities are happy to see foreigners coming to study their language and literature. It gives the host communities a sense of value for their language. This is easily noticeable when the host communities interact with their guests. The host communities speak the language with elated dignity, exactness in speech, diction, gesture, and accent to depict originality. Additionally, these are exhibited to enable the guests learn the pros and cons of the language. The host community welcome the visits of these guests. Sometimes they designated families to accommodate them so as to enculturate them. This is very common in the University of Ibidun, Nigeria. The whole communities are also expectant of their guests at a particular time of the year. This motivates preparations to meet their needs, bearing in mind language is the conveyor of culture. The preparations of the hosts communities have socio-economic impact on the people because their guests are also tourists who will need memorabilia to take home.
These were all the contributions we received in reply to this month's question. Have you ever witnessed similar or even completely different examples of research having an impact? What are your recommendations for increasing such an impact? Please feel free to engage with the contributions and tell us your thoughts in the comments below. As always, thank you so much for tuning into this month's episode of Afrikanists Assemble. Don't forget to subscribe to not miss out on any future episodes. Until next time.